I wasn't researching giants. I was cataloguing Victorian furniture when I found a chair that made no anatomical sense. The seat stood 36 inches from the floor, nearly twice the standard height. The armrests were positioned so high that if I sat in it, my arms would dangle uselessly at my sides. The museum catalogue called it decorative excess, a ceremonial piece, nothing more. But then I found another one, and another, dozens of them scattered across estate sales and forgotten storage rooms. Not thrones designed for intimidation, just ordinary sitting chairs, office chairs, dining chairs, all built for people who stood somewhere between 8 and 10 feet tall. People who, according to every history textbook I've ever read, never existed. The photographic evidence appeared next, not paintings that could be dismissed as artistic exaggeration, not folklore passed down through generations of embellishment. Actual photographs, cabinet cards from the 1870s, showing men in formal military dress, standing beside companions of normal height, their heads reaching heights that should be impossible. Tin-type images from construction sites where workers tower over their colleagues by 3 full feet, wearing the same dusty work clothes, holding the same tools, captured in the same casual moments that define every other labour photograph from that era. The grain matches, the lighting is consistent, the shadows fall exactly where they should. These images were created before the technology existed to fake them convincingly. The British Museum has several locked away in archives marked miscellaneous. The Smithsonian mentions them in passing, categorizes them as medical curiosities, then moves on without further investigation. French collections show similar images, properly catalogued, properly dated, properly filed, and properly ignored. Russian imperial records reference persons of unusual stature serving in ceremonial guard positions, their heights documented with the same bureaucratic precision applied to every other administrative detail. The pattern repeats across continents. Acknowledge the evidence, categorize it carefully, then never speak of it again. But here's what troubles me most. These individuals weren't photographed as spectacles. They weren't circus performers advertised with hyperbolic claims and theatrical backdrops. They were captured in mundane settings, wearing ordinary period clothing, standing beside family members, positioned in front of government buildings, documented with the same casual formality applied to any other portrait subject of that era. Their presence was so unremarkable that photographers saw no need to explain or contextualize what they were capturing. As if human beings standing 9 feet tall were simply another variation of normal. The photographs cluster in a specific window, 1850 through the early 1900s. Then they stop. Not gradually, not with declining frequency as some medical condition naturally disappeared from the population. They stop abruptly, as if a switch had been flipped, as if the subjects themselves simply vanished from the earth. I started measuring doorways after I noticed the pattern in the photographs. Government buildings from the 1700s and 1800s feature interior doors reaching 12 to 15 feet high. Not entrance doors designed for grandeur or public intimidation. Working doors, corridor doors, office doors in administrative wings where aesthetic excess serves no practical purpose. Courthouses across America, municipal buildings throughout Europe, government complexes in Russia and India, all constructed during the same narrow period, all featuring the same oversized proportions. The official explanation attributes this to decorative fashion, architectural trends favoring imposing scale. But fashion doesn't explain functionality. Fashion doesn't explain why staircases were built with risers so tall that normal humans must stretch uncomfortably to climb them. Fashion doesn't explain furniture scaled beyond human proportion appearing in working offices and administrative chambers. The pattern extends globally with disturbing precision. In St. Petersburg, buildings attributed to Russian architects from the 1700s contain back hallway doors that reach 12 feet. In Buenos Aires, municipal structures feature staircases requiring strides that would exhaust anyone of normal height. In Delhi, government buildings supposedly constructed by and for British colonial administrators contain desks and chairs at scales that would make a 6-foot man feel like a child attempting to use adult furniture. These weren't ceremonial spaces. These were working buildings, daily use structures, the ordinary architecture of governance and oversight. Who were they built for? That's when Tartaria becomes impossible to ignore. Maps from the 1700s and early 1800s show it clearly. A vast territory spanning northern Asia, labelled with the same cartographic certainty as France or Spain. Not speculation, not mythical kingdoms, actual documented territory appearing in encyclopedias, atlases, and official geographic records. Then, somewhere in the mid-1800s, it vanishes, not conquered through military campaigns that left documentation, not renamed through political treaties we can examine. Erased, the maps are redrawn, the encyclopedias stop mentioning it, the history books pretend it never existed, but the architecture remains. Massive stone structures across Central Asia, Russia, and Mongolia, buildings exhibiting precision that modern engineers struggle to explain, doorways sized for occupants of extraordinary height, halls that echo with vastness that seems excessive unless you understand who walked them. All of this supposedly built by various local craftsmen using primitive tools, with no verified construction records, no architectural plans, no explanation for how such engineering precision was achieved with the technology that supposedly existed. What if the giants weren't anomalies? What if they were the administrative class of a civilization we've been taught to forget? What if Tartaria, whatever it actually was, employed these individuals not as curiosities, but as functional members of society, and the architecture we've inherited reflects that reality? It would explain why the photographs always show them in formal official contexts, guards standing outside government buildings, foremen overseeing construction crews, administrators posed in ceremonial dress, always positioned in settings that suggest authority, oversight, governance. It would explain why they disappear from the photographic record in the 1890s, precisely when the last references to Tartaria vanish from official maps and encyclopedias. It would explain why the buildings remain, but their occupants have been systematically written out of history. The newspaper record corroborates something equally disturbing. Throughout the 1800s and early 1900s, American newspapers regularly reported discoveries of giant human skeletons, not tabloid sensationalism. Mainstream publications. The New York Times in 1885 documented a 7-foot skeleton discovered in a Michigan mound. The San Diego Union in 1895 reported bones of extraordinary size found during railroad excavation. The Middletown Signal in 1899 described giant human remains uncovered in Ohio. The accounts are matter-of-fact, clinical, treating the discoveries as newsworthy but not particularly controversial. They describe skeletons measuring 7 to 12 feet in length, often found in organized burial sites, frequently accompanied by artifacts suggesting advanced metallurgical knowledge and sophisticated construction techniques. Then, after approximately 1920, these reports stop appearing. Discoveries that had been front-page news for decades simply ceased to be documented. The skeletons already found, many sent to the Smithsonian Institution for further study, have vanished. The Smithsonian now claims no such specimens exist in their collections, missing, lost, misplaced during routine transfers. Hundreds of documented specimens, all gone without proper explanation. The burial sites tell their own story. When 19th century railroad workers uncovered these massive skeletal remains, they weren't digging in remote wilderness. They were excavating along planned routes through populated areas, through regions that had been mapped and surveyed, through territory that supposedly contained nothing but simple indigenous settlements. Yet they kept finding organized burial chambers, stone-lined vaults, elaborate funeral arrangements suggesting social stratification and cultural complexity. These weren't hastily dug graves. These were engineered structures built to last millennia, constructed with the same precision we see in the oversized buildings. Artifacts buried alongside the remains raise additional questions. Copper ornaments displaying sophisticated metalworking techniques. Stone tools crafted at scales requiring enormous hands to wield effectively. Ceremonial objects whose purpose remains unclear because we're examining them through the wrong interpretive framework. We're trying to understand them as primitive tribal artifacts when they might be remnants of an administrative culture, symbols of authority and governance rather than shamanic ritual. I've traced shipping manifests from the 1890s. Multiple entries document the transfer of unusual skeletal specimens to the Smithsonian and other major institutions. The paperwork exists, the receipts are filed, the transportation records confirm delivery, but the specimens themselves have vanished. Not just misplaced, systematically disappeared. Storage facilities that should contain them show no record of their arrival. Catalogue systems that should track them return no results. It's as if someone went through the collections and removed every piece of physical evidence while leaving just enough documentation to prove the evidence once existed. The timing matters. The systematic removal of these specimens coincides almost exactly with the standardization of anthropological education in American universities. The period when official narratives about human development became codified, when questioning certain aspects of the established timeline became professionally dangerous, when academic careers could be destroyed by pursuing the wrong questions. The institutional structure we rely on for historical knowledge was built on a foundation that required certain evidence to disappear. The synchronicity is impossible to ignore. Giant skeleton discoveries peak during the same decades the photographs appear. Both phenomena cluster during the same period when Tartaria disappears from maps. Then, everything stops simultaneously. The photographs stop. The newspaper reports stop. The maps change. The encyclopedias rewrite themselves, as if someone decided certain questions were no longer acceptable to ask. Let me propose something that sounds absurd until you examine the evidence. What if the giants weren't rulers, but specialized functionaries, guardians, overseers, administrators of infrastructure and construction? What if their size was functional rather than ceremonial? What if buildings were scaled to them because they were the ones overseeing construction and maintaining systems we no longer understand? It would explain the architectural patterns, why government buildings and administrative centers feature oversized proportions while residential areas remain human-scaled, why historical records mention them in roles of supervision and authority, but rarely as merchants or artists or common laborers, why the photographs show them in official contexts rather than domestic settings. It would explain the construction mystery. How were massive stone structures built with such precision in the 1700s and 1800s? Maybe they weren't built by the civilizations we credit them to. Maybe they were built for those civilizations by a previous society that employed individuals physically capable of moving stones, operating machinery, and overseeing construction at scales we consider impossible. And it would explain the systematic erasure. If you're inheriting structures you didn't build, inheriting technology you don't fully understand, inheriting architectural systems designed for a different type of human being, what do? You adapt the narrative. You claim it as your own. You rewrite the construction dates, backdate the architects, and remove any evidence suggesting someone else was here first. I found tools that confirm this. Massive wrenches discovered in demolition sites across Europe and North America. Not decorative pieces, functional tools showing wear patterns consistent with actual use. Tools measuring 4, 5, sometimes 6 feet in length, weighing 200 pounds, designed for hands much larger than ours. Museums categorize them as industrial equipment without explaining what industrial process would require implements that need the grip strength of 3 normal men to operate. They appear too frequently in estate sales and building demolitions to be dismissed as isolated curiosities. What disturbs me most isn't the evidence itself, it's the coordinated silence surrounding it. Academic institutions don't debate the giant skeletons. They pretend they never existed. Museums don't display the photographs. They file them in archives marked unverified. Historical societies don't investigate the architectural proportions. They dismiss them as artistic choice. The pattern repeats across disciplines, across countries, across centuries of scholarship. It's not active suppression. It's passive erasure. Questions that simply aren't asked. Evidence that isn't examined. dots that aren't connected, because connecting them leads to conclusions that don't fit the established narrative. And when you point it out, when you lay the evidence side by side, the photographs, the architecture, the newspaper reports, the missing records, you're met with the same response. Interesting, but not significant, as if patterns don't matter, as if asking why is somehow inappropriate. But the why is the entire point. Why did humans of extraordinary size exist in sufficient numbers to be regularly photographed and regularly discovered in burial sites? Why were they documented then forgotten? Why does architecture from a specific period accommodate their proportions? Why do these elements cluster in the same geographical regions and time periods as Tartaria's disappearance from cartographic record? The massive doorways remain. The oversized staircases still stand. The buildings that make no sense for human proportions continue serving modern functions, their original purpose obscured by centuries of adaptive reuse. We walk through them daily without asking why. We accept the official explanations without examining whether they actually explain anything. Because examining them requires accepting that history isn't a straight line of progress, that we might be living in the remnants of something more sophisticated, something we didn't build, something we don't fully understand, that the giants in the photographs weren't aberrations, but evidence of a different arrangement, a different society, a different world that someone decided we're no longer allowed to remember.